Welcome to the Royal Chronicles. I'm Hannah here with Luke.
Hello.
And I believe this is episode 13 of season 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be fun today because if you heard our last episode, and if you didn't, you absolutely should, on the Romanovs of Russia, we mentioned at the very end of that episode, we had a On This Day in Royal History. And it was the topic that we're going to discuss today. Luke got so jazzed about it, we decided to just turn it into a whole episode. So it's going to be fun.
Just a really interesting story and period of history.
Oh, you're right. I wasn't particularly familiar with it. Not a lot of details.
Not a lot of people talk about this time period.
And it blows me away after having read about it and looked into it for this episode. I can't believe that there haven't been films made about it and TV series. I mean, it's crazy. But we are today going to be discussing Empress Matilda, or the Lady of the English. Wasn't she also known as that?
That's the title she picked when she was claiming the throne.
Right.
But the Empress thing isn't an English title. It's from her marriage to the Holy Roman Emperor.
Mm-hmm. But before we get into it, thank you to all of our listeners. If you've been with us from the beginning or for a while now, we appreciate you continuing to stick with us. If you're new, we're glad you're here. We really hope you enjoy this content. We certainly have a lot of fun doing it. As I've said in previous episodes, I just assume we're here just kind of talking to ourselves. And if anyone else happens to join in, it's great. I mean, that's wonderful. But anyway, if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on our various social media platforms. We keep Instagram pretty updated. Definitely YouTube. We're posting pretty much all of our new podcast episodes on there, in addition to our other show, Teen Shenanigans, which is, our gossipy show on modern royal events and things like that, all the nonsense that goes on. But anyway, enough with all that. Let's get to it. So Empress Matilda, and I think just from my perspective, it's good to keep in mind when we're talking about a figure like this so far back in history, relatively speaking, it's a good idea to keep in mind that when we're talking about them, the structure and the society was very different from what we consider or what England looks like today, and the royal family and titles and rulers and all of that. It's a very different landscape. And so you really have to keep that in mind when we go through some of these details, because it sounds kind of foreign almost fragmented, like what in the world is going on. But it was a very different world at that time, which is how this could end up happening. You have a kind of a contested crown, I guess.
Yes. But also, one of the things I have found very interesting about this time period and this particular conflict is how real the people feel. I mean, how in a lot of later history, it seems like the, rulers and nobility, they do things that I just can't really fully understand, like during the War of the Roses, where they're killing, close relatives and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In this one, they feel a little more, I don't know, relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Which is weird because it's further back in history.
It's so far back. In fact, that's a good leading in point. I'm sure that's a technical term. I just made that up. So Empress Matilda was born. I don't believe it's 100% known. They say sometime around February. They say possibly the 7th of February, 1102.
And possibly in Winchester, but we're not exactly sure.
And she was born to Henry the First. Mm-hmm. So that makes her the granddaughter of William the Conqueror, which if you have a cursory knowledge of or just world history, I'm sure you've heard of William the Conqueror.
In 1066.
Yes.
The conquest.
It's a very
by
famous date. Yes. Her father Henry the First, but her mother also named Matilda of Scotland. And as you say, this is so far back that the details of her early childhood and upbringing aren't particularly well known.
Not really. We pretty much just assume that she got a general religious education. Her mother was very known for being involved with the church and being very pious. It's believed that part of that education, she learned to read, so she was literate, which wasn't common at the time for men or women who weren't members of the church. So that's, and most of this we're kind of assuming from references later on in her life.
Right.
But we're guessing that this is kind of what her education was like.
I think it's probably a fair assumption.
Yeah.
So let's see, her father, or am I thinking of her mother? Her mother was the daughter of King Malcolm III
Of Scotland, yes.
Right. And Margaret of Wessex, who was a descendant of Alfred the Great.
Yes. So through that part of her family, she technically has, like, I don't know if you'd call it a claim, but she has a connection to the Anglo-Saxon kings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting that she had one younger legitimate brother, and
Yes.
emphasize legitimate because it's estimated that she had around 22 illegitimate siblings via her father's various mistresses.
So 23 brothers and sisters. And those are just the ones we know about.
Right.
But knowing about them is important because that means that they were acknowledged and probably at least present at the court that her father held. So she would have known most of them and known several of them very closely.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's such a bizarre. I mean, that was a common thing for royal families, royal children.
Oddly enough, not particularly in this family, because William the Conqueror is not known to have had any mistresses or any illegitimate children. But his son definitely did.
Go figure. So, as I said, there's not a lot known about her very early life. We do know that in 1108, Matilda and her legitimate brother, William, they were left in the care of the Archbishop of Canterbury while he traveled to Normandy. That's kind of interesting.
Well, they and their mother were staying in England while Henry returned to Normandy for, I can't remember what all happened, but he did have to regularly go back and forth between Normandy and England. And you would normally leave your heirs under the protection of a powerful, member of the court in England.
That's another interesting point, is that at this time, and for quite some time thereafter, what is currently known today as, well, let's just say, not just England, but the UK and France, there was a lot of intermingling. England had territory in what is now known as France. The aristocracy for a period of time, the English aristocracy, they spoke French.
Yes.
So Normandy, you think, oh, that's France. Well, it is today, but back then.
Well, back then it was part of the Kingdom of France, but the Dukes of Normandy ruled their lands under the King of France, but then in England, they ruled as kings independent from the Kingdom of France.
Like I say, you have to readjust your thinking sort of for all this.
A foot in both worlds. And they're working in two different systems at the same time.
So interesting. Okay, so moving along, because I think Matilda is an interesting character. We're really trying to cover most of her life, not just some of the other episodes. We have to condense things a little bit. But moving along to her marriage. Well, she was married twice.
Yes.
Correct. Her
first one very young.
Yes. Very young. Married in 1114, and she was born in 1102. So do the math on that one. What?
12?
12? Good Lord. Okay. But she married Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yes.
Which is where
big title.
Oh, yeah.
And pretty far away from home.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit. I cannot speak. Let's talk a little bit about that time in her life, because it was a pivotal moment, no?
Yes. So this is generally, at least for people who want to foreshadow things in the future, considered to be a very formative time in her life, because she's taken out of the court of her father and brought to the court in Germany. She is now the Empress and Queen of the Romans. So she has all these very high titles. And her husband, while not being the, total ruler of Germany and Northern Italy, he's the overall ruler, the one who all the other ones can appeal to. So it's a very prestigious position, and a lot of influence went with it. So a lot of people see this as her being taken to a much bigger world where she was basically placed right at the very top when she arrived.
As a
And
12-year-old, that's something.
Yes, and lots of people seem to think that that was very informative for her the rest of her life.
Well, I can imagine, especially since her husband was 16 years her senior.
Yes.
Which
Another thing to remember about this is that traditionally in this time period, yes, they would marry young, but they wouldn't necessarily be fully married. Like they wouldn't be sleeping together or anything until she's older.
Which is, it's such a, I mean, then why call it, why get married, quote unquote? Like, it's just weird.
To secure the alliance.
Betrothal wasn't good enough, I suppose.
Well, this
it almost harkens back to biblical times, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know. This particular marriage was important for her husband because it secured his lands and her father's lands against the French. Because by marrying the heir, well, not the heir, but at least the daughter of the Duke of Normandy, they secured a flanking ally against the French. So the Holy Roman Emperor is on the east side and the Normans are on the west side.
Okay, so after this, there's a lot of things that go on. There's some kind of conflict that breaks out not long after their quote unquote marriage. After Henry arrested his chancellor, archbishop of something that I cannot pronounce, I'm so sorry. But there were rebellions and other things that went on during that time. And I believe it's in 1116 they march over the Alps into Italy to, I guess, settle things with the then Pope, because that was a thing back then.
Yes, this is in a period where there was a lot of contention between the Holy Roman Emperors and the popes, because they'd started out as a partnership, but then there kept being this push and pull where one side or the other wanted to be in charge. So, the Pope said, I bestow the imperial title on you. That makes me in charge. And, I speak for God.
Yeah.
And then the emperor would say, well, I'm the emperor and I'm the one who protects you and who, enforces all of the laws. So I'm in charge.
Imperialist problems. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But you know what gets me about this is that they're married in 1114. We established she's 12. By 1116, when this is going on, when she's, 14 years old, she's actively participating in the government. She's sponsoring grants. She's dealing with petitioners, taking part in ceremony. Like these days we would say, of royals, they're doing their royal duties or whatever.
Yes, she
an
was
active working royal,
active participant in the government
at
of her husband.
14 years old.
Yes.
That's amazing to me. Okay, so let's fast
And another very important thing to remember about this that's not always common for, princesses brought into other countries to secure alliances. She was very popular in Germany as empress. She didn't make very many enemies, and she was an active member of the government and still managed to be generally popular with the court.
Yeah. Okay, so am I missing anything if I move on to, as
far as she's concerned, that's pretty much.
Yeah. Because we now come to what, when she, becomes a widow.
Very young.
Very, very young. Is it in, oh gosh, what year is it? Let me see. I have notes here someplace. Okay, 1125. So yeah, that's not a very long period of time. But the death of
Emperor Henry.
There's
a lot of Henrys in this story.
Oh my gosh, yes. Doesn't it say, I'm going way too far ahead, but on her tombstone, doesn't it say something like daughter, wife, and mother of Henry? Because her father was named Henry. Her first
I
husband
believe
was
so.
Henry.
Yes,
Isn't that crazy?
it is.
Like, get a different name, people, please.
I don't think it was intentional.
Good Lord. Okay, so, but her son Henry didn't come of her first husband, right? Weren't they childless?
No. Yeah. So there were no children from the first marriage.
That's
like
what
I
I
said, early on in the marriage, they wouldn't have been like sleeping together. They wouldn't have consummated the marriage because
Yeah.
she would have been considered too young.
Well, I would think so.
Well, yes, but I'm just saying. So they're technically married, but not fully married. And so I don't know if it's even been officially established if they even consummated the marriage during his life.
Oh, they must have, because supposedly when they remained childless, and neither party was considered to be infertile, people believe that it was because of the emperor's sins against the church or something.
Well, yes.
But I mean, who knows? Maybe they didn't. Maybe that's why.
I mean, like
know.
I said, we don't really know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's
okay.
possible, but we're not sure. We just know that they didn't have any children.
Well, in any case, the emperor, when he died in 1125, he left Matilda in the protection of their nephew, Frederick, who was heir to all of his all the loot,
the future emperor.
Let's say, yes. But at this point, what is Matilda looking at?
So she can stay in Germany and become a sort of passive member of the court, an observer. Mostly she can do charity work, and she can use some of her influence from her previous position, but she doesn't really have a lot of options for her future if she stays in Germany. So
this very young woman, childless, these days you would say childless and kind of free to do whatever you want, but in that society that really wasn't, how she would have been viewed, right?
Kind of depends on what your goals were.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, if she wanted to, she could have, joined a religious community or, lived on one of her estates and just kind of lived out her life like that. But if she wanted to be an active member of a government, she would have to either go back home to her father's court or don't really know what she could have done in Germany. If she had married anyone else, she would have made somebody angry. So maybe not a good choice there.
Well, she made up her mind, I suppose, because the same year, 1125, she remarried to Geoffrey of, how do you say it? Anjou.
Which was definitely her father's choice, not hers.
Oh. Go on.
So one thing that's known about this particular match is that she did not want to marry him. The House of Anjou were the traditional enemies of the Norman dukes, and they were virtually always fighting over something since the formation of the duchy. So he was kind of the enemy, and she had just gotten, just gotten back after losing her first husband and, the whole life that she thought she was going to have in Germany. And her father says, okay, you have to marry this guy so that we can try to establish better relations with our worst enemy.
I misspoke a minute ago. In 1125, as you said, she returned to Normandy. She didn't get remarried until 1128. It's only 3 years later, but I said the wrong thing. Anyways, so with all this, isn't there a point where her father gathered like all the barons together and had them kind of swear their allegiance or recognize her as his successor and her children if she had, or something like that?
So earlier on, we when we were talking about her siblings, we mentioned her younger brother.
Right.
He had died in a tragic accident known as the White Ship tragedy. Where he and the sons and daughters of many other noble houses had all been going from Normandy to England on a ship together, and it had sunk, and everyone died. Well, at least all of the noblemen. There's one person who was supposed to have lived, who was a commoner who had taken passage on the ship, and he basically said all the others drowned, and none of the others were ever found.
That's wild.
So this left her father with a problem. He had so a total of 24 acknowledged children, but only 2 of them were legitimate, and his only male heir was now dead.
Hmm.
So he needed to decide what his next course of action would be.
And as interesting, it's kind of a pickle, if you will, because of this period, they were really starting to favor male primogeniture.
They
so that would explain why he gathered everybody together and was like, okay, look, you got to promise me you're going to do, you're going to recognize her.
Yes, and this has a couple of facets to it. One is that tendency to favor the male preference primogeniture, if not outright male exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Another issue is that he has virtually two different kingdoms. He has the Duchy of Normandy and he has the Kingdom of England. And he now has a contested heir. He's going to have to try to get both of these independent groups of people to agree to one person. So there's all of that. And now we add in the next part, which is that she's a woman, so she's got that disadvantage. And she's married to the Norman Duke's traditional enemy. So all of the nobility of Normandy hate her husband.
Oh, and back on that for a second, I don't know why I didn't mention this earlier. Her second husband, when they're married, she's 25. He is 13 years old.
Yes.
What is going on with these people? And like jailbait, what is going on? I know it wasn't jailbait back then, but like, ew, gross.
I know.
No wonder she didn't want to marry him. No 25. That's just, ugh.
But you know what's funny about that? Okay, so like I was saying,
so gross.
She got all of these problems for her trying to, claim her right to these titles.
Mm-hmm.
Then you add in the issue of, how I said that when she was married to Geoffrey, her second husband, she hadn't been thrilled with it. Well, shortly after marrying him, it seems she had, I don't know if you'd call it a change of heart, or that she just decided that since her father forced her to marry someone she didn't want to, she was going to make her father as miserable as possible. So basically,
nobody saw that coming.
She and her new husband, I wouldn't exactly say declared war on her father, but they continually fought him over things, over land rights, over the border between her husband's land and her father's land. It was not a very happy relationship. But in one of their periods of peace, her father did manage to get all of the nobles of Normandy and then all of the nobles of England to swear that their allegiance to his chosen heir, Matilda, and that they would support her claim.
Well, yeah. And let's get to how it is that it became contested, because as you say, this is not a story that I don't think is told very often. But she, at some point, is, I guess, one choice, one potential ruler, but then you have her, what's the word? The person she's competing with, Stephen, correct? Yes. So let's get it. Let's get into adversary. That's the word I'm looking for. Good Lord. Let's get into that.
Okay. So like we were saying, at the point where both of the nobilities of England and Normandy have sworn their allegiance to Matilda and to support her succession, it really seems like it's all sewn up. That's it. Her father has chosen and they've all promised. But like I said, the relationship between Matilda and her father was a bit contentious through the years. So nearing the end of his life, they're at war again. And he, throughout his life, had been very close with one of his nephews, a son of his sister. His name is Stephen of Blois, and he's a member of a noble house that comes from the Low Countries. So what's now the Netherlands area. And he had basically been a fixture at Henry's court and was just I don't know. He seemed to get along very well with the king.
He also swore support to
He
Matilda
did.
in
He was one of the
1127.
first members of the nobility to swear.
But then he basically made this excuse that that the king had been wrong to have him do that, and he changed his mind on his deathbed, even though there was no evidence of that.
Yes, so that's the claim. It's that on his deathbed, Stephen was present and several other lords, and they claim that the king changed his mind and said that Stephen would be the heir instead of Matilda. And that is when everything fell apart.
Well, the wheels came off,
Yes.
that's for sure.
And strictly speaking, it's possible that he did that because, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility for someone to do something very, I don't know, erratic in this particular time and place like that. But it's also possible that they were all making it up just because they didn't want Matilda and they knew that they could, pretend the king had said whatever they want.
Exactly. So isn't it, I believe it's correct that Stephen was crowned at Westminster?
Yes.
And
so he
Matilda
initially
never
got the
was.
support of the barons in Normandy. And then he went straight to England, went to London, won over the citizens of the city, which was a very important step in gaining the support of the English. If you can secure London, you've got a huge advantage. Then he went on to Westminster and secured the treasury. And then he met with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, this is when we get the accounts of what happened with the king's death. And he has several noblemen willing to swear that the king changed his mind right before he died. And the Archbishop accepts their testimony and agrees to crown him. So he went from the guy who happened to be there when the king died and said the king definitely made me his heir, to I have been proclaimed by all of the major lords. I control London, the treasury, and the support of the English church.
Well,
so it's like a complete
Pope.
Yes, that came after after he was crowned by the Archbishop. But yeah, so it's a complete flip from Matilda has all the legitimacy to Stephen suddenly is now holding all the signs of legitimacy.
Right. And she never was crowned, right?
No.
I didn't think so.
Like I said, this is important in the story, what happens with London, because they can make or break what happens later.
And let's get to that. So just kind of continuing on with her life chronologically, by 1136, she has had 3 children. And it's reported that she's asked someone, what's his name? The Bishop of, is it Angers? Anger, Angers. The name is Olger, or I don't know. I don't know these names. Ulger. Anyway, supposedly she asked, I assume it's a man, him to kind of appeal to Pope Innocent II, you know, and whether or not this person ever did that, it was obviously unsuccessful. Then her husband invades Normandy in 1136. And there's just all kinds of stuff that's going on. They invade this place. Stephen forms an army to retake Matilda's castles.
Okay,
it just sounds like a mess to me.
Okay, so here's where we get into the parts that I think are like very interesting and kind of almost like more relatable. So during the initial invasion, Matilda and her forces land at a place called Arundel, not the one from Frozen. And her husband and his armies kind of immediately take off to go and start meeting up with the other lords that are in England who are willing to support her. She's still there, and she becomes besieged by Stephen and his army. Well, you'd think, she's been caught in a fortress and she's either going to have to retreat or wait out a siege. No, she asks for a safe conduct to go and meet with her supporters in Dover. I mean, sorry, not Dover. In why can I not remember the name of the city? It's on the West Coast, Bristol. And they say yes. They give her a piece of paper that says that no one's allowed to capture her, and she leaves and meets up with her supporters, which is just insane to think about, unless you remember the fact that all of these people who are in charge more or less all grew up together, and they're all friends, more or less, and they're all related, and they're not willing to just, murder each other immediately. So that's kind of a different, I don't know, way of thinking about the warfare that's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another thing to remember is that with all of these, war going back and forth, people attacking this place, attacking that place, in comparison to wars now, or even, 100 or 200 years after this, the scale is much smaller. These are armies of a couple hundred people. And they're not, destroying entire sections of the countryside. Most of the destruction that takes place during this war is from areas that law and order has broken down. And people are fighting each other over old grievances, revenge, robbing each other. That's where a lot of the destruction comes from, because there's no law holding people in place.
Mm-hmm.
So while the war's going on, a lot of the damage is done by the people who aren't actually fighting over whether or not Stephen or Matilda should be in charge. They're fighting over whether or not the cows next door are theirs or the ones that were stolen a year ago.
Oh my goodness.
So that's something important to remember about this.
Yeah, you really have to adjust your thinking when you go through some of these stories. There's at some point where her Matilda's, is it her uncle who David, the King of Scotland?
Yes.
When at some point he invades the north of England, like the
he's
Yorkshire
one of the
area?
first people to say, after Stephen has grabbed all of the signs of legitimacy, that no, this is wrong. We all promised to support Matilda. He's not he's not the ruler of any part of England or of Normandy, but he is a relative, and he does hold some land along the borders that's kind of debatable whether or not it's English or Scottish. And he basically comes down and says, no, you can't just take the throne because it's my niece's.
Exactly.
Of course, this gets a little more complicated because the first time he comes down and does this, Stephen says, hey, will you take a couple of cities up in the north of England and go away? And he says, sure. And that's how their first interaction goes. But then when Matilda lands, he comes back down and says, oh, yeah, I'm still on your side. We're still going to fight for you.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so let's get into, I guess, the later years of her life as she is this rival monarch, empress. I don't know. It's really difficult to classify what's going on here because everyone has acknowledged
rival claimant.
Yes, there you go. I don't know. After all of the back and forth and the fighting and the invading and the all that sort of thing, what happens?
So, like I said, you have this initial outbreak of war where her forces land, she's trapped, and they let her go. Most of her support is down in the southwest of England, centered around the power base that one of her illegitimate brothers. He's the Duke of Gloucester, and he's basically like her big supporter.
Right.
And he kind of holds her claim out through basically the whole period. Like I said, there's a lot of back and forth, but finally there's a decisive battle. And Matilda's forces capture Stephen.
Hmm.
When they capture him, they manage to get him to renounce the throne. So he says, okay, no, I'm not king anymore. You're the rightful queen. And he's captured. So it seems like the war is over now.
Hmm.
The only problem is, number one, his wife, Matilda of Flanders, who we should probably do a podcast on as well, is not captured. And she and everyone she can gather together are still out there, and they say the war is not over. So they are ready to continue the war. Stephen's been captured, but Matilda feels secure enough that she's going to go ahead and she's going to get her coronation, and she's going to take all of the signs of legitimacy.
Hmm.
She heads to London, and when she shows up, this is another thing that it depends on your view of Matilda, how you sort of interpret this interaction that took place. So basically what we know is that she shows up and she says, let me into the city. I'm your rightful queen. And the other guy has given up and said that he isn't the king anymore. The people inside the city say, oh, sure, but will you give us some things that we really want? The main thing they wanted is to be recognized as a commune, which is basically like it's a city with its own rights, and it has a charter that says what those rights are. Mm-hmm. And the king can't just come in and do whatever he wants. She basically says what all the members of her family had been saying since they conquered England. No, London is my city, and I'm going to, continue on as we've been. And they say, nope, that's not good enough. You can't come in. So she's just basically waiting outside the city without sufficient forces to capture it. And she just kind of looks silly. So like I said, depending on the way you think of Matilda, it could either be that she was too harsh and too prideful to, just tip the scales over that last little bit and take London, mm-hmm. or it's that they were too prejudiced against her to accept her.
Goodness gracious.
But the important thing is that she never manages to get her coronation, mm-hmm. which symbolically is a pretty big loss.
Well, yeah. I mean, because if you don't have the crown, you just don't have it.
Exactly. And like I said, the allegiance of London is a huge factor when you're fighting a war. Mm-hmm. So she's basically won, but you have Stephen's wife, who has not given up, and her forces, and they now have London on their side.
Everybody has their own little armies. It's so funny when you think about it. Everybody has their own little private, forces. Yeah. It's just crazy. Okay, so just a little side note, because this is my thing. You want to hear some 12th century gossip?
Sure.
Okay, so there were legends that spread, well, I guess so, yeah. In the years after Matilda's death, there was a suggestion that her first husband didn't really die, but he had just secretly become a hermit. And that made her second marriage illegitimate. And then there was this wild story that Matilda had an affair with Stephen, which resulted in Henry II, her son, that then became, I mean, it's funny that it just goes to show, human nature, gossip, it's existed for as long as we've been around. Oh, yeah. It's just, I thought that was funny. It's the sort of stuff that's just so wild and outlandish, and probably most certainly didn't happen, but that is of course the story that people are going to make up and tell. Of course. Yeah. Okay, so I find this interesting. Let's get into how it is, and we can go back if you want, mm-hmm. but how in the world did her son, Matilda's son, Henry II, become Henry II?
So that's basically picking up where we just left off. Like I said, she basically won, but then she lost London, basically just through negotiations. They are still supporting Stephen, and Stephen's wife, Matilda of Flanders, manages to turn the tide once again, mm-hmm. back to Stephen's side. So they manage to push her forces slowly back towards the southwest, And then they capture Stephen.
Mhm.
And he says, I'm king again.
Go figure.
That other thing I said was an accident. Never mind. So everything has flipped again. After this, Matilda leaves and she doesn't ever return to England. The war keeps being fought, but she basically she's not going to be personally there after that point. The war just kind of continues on, and so we're talking about a conflict between these two that lasts from the late 1130s into the 1150s.
Good grief.
So it's basically the remainder of their lives.
It's really sad if you think about it.
It is.
Like just I don't know, make a decision, something.
So the criticisms that are usually leveled against the two of them are that Stephen was too nice to definitively win the war because he's constantly like letting people go or giving them safe passage somewhere, and that Matilda was too proud and too like, I'm the empress to get the allegiance of her people. At least that's the story that a lot of the historians go with.
Well, that kind of that rings true to me.
Yeah. But then the other thing is that through a lot of this time, so much of it is basically just their lords switching sides and being like, oh, I'm on your side. And then they get offered something they want. And oh, no, I'm on their side now. And they just don't have enough power to lock the lords down into an allegiance. So it just drags on.
Good grief. Okay. So as you say, she goes back to Normandy. She pretty much lives the rest of her life there. Although she does act as kind of a representative of her son, Henry II.
Yes.
Here and there. And I don't know. That's just kind of it for her, isn't it?
Well, so they end up coming to an agreement, which basically is that Stephen, who, sort of an interesting note, through all of this warring back and forth, he has a couple of sons. Well, his oldest son dies. And after he dies, Stephen seems to have sort of lost the desire to keep fighting for the continuation of holding the throne. And basically he just comes to an agreement with Matilda's son that, okay, I'll be king now and you'll be my heir. I'll disinherit my other sons later, and you'll be the heir.
Good grief. His other sons must have been absolutely...
Oddly enough, they weren't.
Really?
They got all of the lands that his family had held back on the continent, but they promised not to fight or even attempt to fight for England.
Go figure.
Yeah.
I could also see how that could be possible. If they've watched, their father do this for forever and ever, they probably were like, you know what? I don't know if I want to deal with that for the rest of my life. So whatever.
And a lot of people think that it's possible that this oldest son who died was the one still pushing, saying, oh, we're going to keep fighting for this because, I'm going to be king next. And after that, it was just like, no, we'll just give it back.
Speaking of taking and giving back things and whatever, did you know that at some point, I think it was in 1155, Henry, that is Matilda's oldest son, proposed to, and this is just, it sounds so wild, but something of that time period, well, others, but whatever, the aristocracy and whatever, proposed to invade Ireland to give to his younger brother, William.
Yes.
Like, I'm just going to invade this place and give it to you. Isn't this a little gift?
It's a family tradition, invading places.
But she said no, said that it was impractical. And that is William, just got, big grants of land in England.
Yeah.
I don't know, consolation prize. I don't know.
Something like that. Plus, another important thing is that if you can't trust all of the lords who keep switching sides, when you get the throne, give the land to people you do trust, like your family members.
Well, yeah.
So at least that's the plan. Like I said, she never returns. Eventually they come to the agreement that her son will be the next king. And she basically just settles into ruling the court back in Anjou. She endows land and money on several religious establishments. And she just to me, it sounds like she kind of just lives her best life down in France.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows that the throne is secure for her son, but she doesn't have to fight over it anymore.
There you go.
But I mean, she had a good adventurous part of her life. And now she just gets to kind of relax.
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, she does die in 1167. And I think it's interesting. We already talked about what's inscribed on her tombstone: daughter,
Yes.
wife, mother of Henry. But there's this whole saga of things that go on with her tomb. It was first damaged by a fire in 1263, and then it was restored in 1282. It was destroyed again by an English army in 1421.
Yes, in the 100 Years' War.
1684, the congregation of Saint, is it Maur? Maur, found some of her bones, I guess. How they knew it was her, I don't know if they're just guessing, but then they reburied them in a new coffin. But then the remains were lost again when the church was damaged or destroyed by Napoleon.
Yes.
It was then they were found again in 1846 and reburied.
Yes.
And that's where they
It's just constant.
It's just so wild. I mean, her life was very wild and exciting, and it sounds like even in death,
her death was
she
wild
can't
and
just
exciting.
rest in peace, or she couldn't for hundreds of years thereafter. Craziness. Anyway,
she stayed active.
Yeah, never a moment's peace. But yeah, she is a really interesting character because
and I mean, this is just scratching the surface of the whole story. There's so much more to this.
Oh, for sure.
To her life, to all of her relationships and the people she was fighting with and against.
I just can't get over why it hasn't been made into some huge, movie, or these days more likely some kind of series on, I don't know, Amazon or whatever.
It would be great.
Yeah, I would love to see it, provided, Hollywood, provided they didn't screw it up, which they tend to do that. I mean, I love to watch The Crown, but we all know that it's mostly fictional and ridiculous, historically speaking. But anyways, not to get on that, but
But also, a bunch of the people who are in The Crown are still alive or were alive while it was being made.
Yeah.
So, there's also that.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
These people are all dead. So if you make stuff up about them, it's not quite as weird.
And in this particular case, you would have to make quite a bit up because there's so many unknowns. You just be guessing, but that would make it really fun.
Exactly.
I would love to write,
but
I guess,
it's also funny how
the story,
there still is enough that you kind of get a feel for the personalities of the different characters.
Well, that's funny you say that because I saw a quote where, let's see, I have it here somewhere. It's stated that she was, in her later life, she kind of became more easygoing than when she was young, which I feel like that's common with a lot of people. The older you get, more you don't have the energy anymore. It's whatever. But a chronicler named Mont Saint, oh gosh, how do you say this?
French name.
I know. Saint something met her. I don't know.
Not sure.
He met her during, later time in her life. And he said that he felt that she appeared to be of, quote, of the stock of tyrants. Very interesting observation of someone's personality. No?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. That tells you a lot right there.
But she also had favorable chroniclers who... because strictly speaking, at the time, she was acting no different than her father or grandfather would have acted.
And it's funny you say that. There are people who are of the feminist bent, and I'm not really of that, but I think their observation is valid in this case. They say that if she had been a man, she would have been, heralded as this great whatever.
Well, if she had won and she had been a man, that would have been true.
They just say that it seems ridiculous that there's so little ink that's been spilled, so to speak, over her compared to Stephen. Yeah. And it's kind of like, yeah, I get it. He was crowned and all of that, but it was contested to the end,
Exactly.
and
I still think it's ridiculous that, I mean, she deposed him. She didn't get crowned, but she got him to say he was no longer the king, and she's still not counted in the lists of kings and queens.
Kind of ridiculous.
It is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you just the more people that we cover and the more stories we discuss that you obviously have a ton of knowledge on, I'm learning as we go. It blows me away the things that we don't learn in history, like class, school, whatever, and the things that are just kind of brushed over, or completely ignored. And it's so interesting that the lives of these people, who they were, the things they did, it really makes you, just me, I look around in the world that we currently live and just think, gosh, we're so boring, and just the stupid stuff that we do and make a big deal about, and also, whatever.
I mean, they were making big deals about small things too. But they also had soldiers who would attack people for them.
I know. It's just all this, conquering, and
I don't know. I'm kind of happy where I am.
No, I'm not saying I want to go back to this. It's just, I don't know. It's just a different time in the world, and yes. Sometimes I do think, wow, we are really lame. When you have 14-year-olds that are like commanding armies and ruling nations, and now 14-year-olds
and doing it reasonably competently, which is the amazing part.
Exactly nowadays, 14-year-olds, oh no, I don't think so. That's just a horrendous idea. Anyway, no shade against 14-year-olds, generally speaking, but anyways, I digress. We're on a rabbit trail here. Well, I think is that the end of it for today?
I think for now, we could do a second episode on her some other time.
We could. Or we could do one on Stephen.
Yes.
And, because it would all be intermingled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be fun.
And then, like I said, I think we should also do one on his wife.
The other Matilda.
Yes, Matilda of Flanders.
The other Matilda that wouldn't give it up.
The undefeatable queen.
Okay.
Because she refused. That was the whole way that they won the war in the end, or at least held the throne, is that she just decided the war wasn't over.
Never give in.
Even though her husband was in prison.
Never give up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I just saying, I did look for an interesting on this day in royal history. Nothing. Sorry. I got nothing. People. I apologize. Maybe next time. But okay. That brings us to the end for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. We hope you enjoy this. I have no idea how long we've been talking, but if you stuck with us all this time, you're a trooper. We appreciate you. As I said in the beginning, make sure you follow us on our various social media platforms, like, share, subscribe, all the things. You know how it goes. But more important than that, if you have comments, you have suggestions, please let us know. Don't be shy. We really appreciate the engagement that we've had with some folks here and there, and the suggestions, because it's helpful to us.
Oh, it's very helpful.
Yeah.
And interactions are always, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Whatever your opinion is, whatever you think of it, as I say, we don't bite, not too hard anyways. But that brings us to the end for today. And we hope to talk to you again next time.
Bye.